The discovery of the ancient ship. In the quiet expanse of deep space, where stars are distant pinpricks of light and planets float like forgotten dreams, a discovery was about to be made, one that would change everything. The year was 2157. Humanity had reached the stars, but there were still mysteries beyond their understanding. In the farthest regions of the galaxy, where few ships dared to travel, the Starship Valiant was making a routine scan. Its crew, led by Captain Marla Hayes, had been searching for new resources and uncharted planets to expand Earth's influence in the galaxy. But on that day, they stumbled upon something far greater than they could have imagined. The ship's sensors had detected an unusual object, something big, hidden deep within a nebula. The signal was faint, but its structure was unmistakable. It was too large to be a natural asteroid, and its shape was far too symmetrical to be just space debris. The Valiant altered its course and moved closer. Captain Hayes stood at the helm, staring at the image on the view screen. The nebulas surrounding the area were thick, and the ship could barely see through the cosmic clouds. The object was just a faint silhouette in the mist of stars, a ghost in the dark. Yet there was something about it that pulled at the crew's curiosity. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates," said Lieutenant Rachel Lee, the ship's navigator. Her voice was steady, but the excitement was clear in her tone. Hayes nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. Could it be a long-lost space station, a derelict mining ship, or perhaps something even older? The mysteries of the galaxy were endless, and the team was about to face something they had never imagined. As they drew nearer, the object came into clearer focus. A massive starship, unlike anything they had ever seen before. Its hull was covered with strange markings, symbols, and patterns that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The ship was dead, completely motionless, yet it felt alive, almost as if it was waiting for something or someone. The edges of the starship were covered in a strange, glowing mist, and its metal surface seemed to shimmer in ways that defied understanding. "It's incredible," Lieutenant Lee whispered. "Look at the design. It doesn't belong to any known civilization." Captain Hayes stood still, studying the ship in front of her. The ancient vessel seemed to be floating there, suspended in the thick nebula, as if it had been abandoned for thousands of years. The ship was enormous, far larger than the Valiant. It looked more like a city than a spaceship. Yet, there were no signs of damage, no burn marks from battle, nothing to suggest it had been in any kind of conflict. It was as if it had been forgotten. "Get a full scan on that ship," Hayes ordered. "I want to know everything about it." The team quickly went to work, their instruments lighting up as they tried to get readings on the ship. But there was something strange about the data. The ship was radiating a low-energy pulse, a signal that was completely alien in nature. Even the ship's core appeared to be inactive, but its outer systems were still producing energy, though in small amounts. As they moved closer, Hayes felt a chill run down her spine. There was something about this ship, something that seemed wrong. It was as though it was alive, waiting for them, but unwilling to reveal its secrets. "We're close enough for a docking attempt," said engineer Marcus Calloway, who had been monitoring the ship's exterior. "Prepare the airlocks. We're going aboard," Hayes decided, her voice firm with determination. Everyone suits up. The airlock doors opened, and the crew, now in their spacesuits, made their way to the external hatch. They stepped out onto the strange hull of the ship, their boots making a soft thud as they landed on the surface. The air was cold, and the silence was almost suffocating. The team moved slowly, their helmets reflecting the soft light from their flashlights. "This ship feels wrong," Lieutenant Lee said, her voice muffled by her helmet. "It's almost like it's breathing." Captain Hayes couldn't help but feel the same sense of unease. The ship seemed so ancient, yet at the same time, it felt so advanced. The hull was made of a material that didn't match anything in human history, smooth, almost like glass, yet stronger than any metal they knew. The ship's surface was covered in strange symbols, perhaps a language or a code that had long been forgotten. They reached the ship's entrance, a massive hatch that was completely sealed. It was unlike any door they had encountered before. There were no locks, no visible openings, only the same strange glowing symbols. Lieutenant Lee stepped forward cautiously and placed her hand on the wall, near the symbols. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, with a soft hum, the ship seemed to respond. Slowly, the hatch began to open. The crew stood still, staring in awe at the ship's interior. As the door slid open, a sudden rush of cool air hit them, air that seemed oddly preserved, as if the ship had been carefully maintained for centuries. They stepped inside. The interior was unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls shimmered with the same strange glow that covered the ship's hull. The room stretched far beyond the ship's outer dimensions, far larger than the area they had boarded. It felt like they had entered some kind of alien citadel, a place that had been abandoned by its creators long ago. But then, they saw it, a pilot's chair, sitting alone at the center of the command deck, surrounded by rows of inactive consoles. The chair was different from anything the crew had ever seen. It was designed not just for comfort, but for something far deeper. It was as if the chair was waiting for someone who was meant to sit there. It was a strange feeling, as if the ship itself had a connection to whoever would dare to sit. As Captain Hayes stepped forward, she could feel the air around her grow colder, the strange energy in the room increasing. The ship's AI, hidden somewhere deep inside, seemed to sense her presence. A faint voice echoed, but it was almost as if the ship was speaking to her mind rather than her ears. Human pilot detected. Initiating systems. Hayes stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. The ship had just responded to her presence. But why? How could it recognize her as a human pilot? And what did that mean for the rest of the crew? Captain Hayes turned to the crew, her voice steady, but filled with disbelief. I think we've just activated something far bigger than we ever imagined. The mystery had only just begun. The ship's strange reaction. The Valiant drifted silently beside the mysterious starship, its crew still reeling from the discovery. Captain Hayes stood at the command console, staring at the view screen. The massive alien vessel now loomed over them, its eerie glow casting a strange light onto the bridge. It had been hours since they boarded, and yet they still hadn't discovered much about the ship's purpose. Its true nature was elusive, like a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit together. Captain, the ship's AI is still offline, but there's something strange. Lieutenant Lee reported, her voice tinged with concern. It's like the ship is responding, but only to you. Captain Hayes frowned. She had already noticed that every attempt to activate the ship's systems had failed, until she stood in front of that strange pilot's chair. The moment she approached it, the entire ship seemed to come alive. Lights flickered, and strange mechanical sounds echoed from within the walls, as if the ship were waking from a long slumber. Could it be that the ship is somehow designed only to respond to humans? Captain Hayes muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Lieutenant Lee hesitated before answering. It's possible, Captain. But what's even more unsettling is that the ship only activates when you're near the pilot's chair. No one else can even touch the control panels, let alone make the ship do anything. It's like it's waiting for you. Hayes didn't like the sound of that. Waiting for her. The idea felt unnatural, even dangerous. Yet there was no denying that something was happening. Something that was far beyond their understanding. She glanced at Marcus Calloway, the ship's chief engineer. What are the power readings? Calloway scanned his terminal. The ship's core is stable, but the energy levels are fluctuating in strange patterns. The systems are barely active, yet it seems to be feeding off some sort of human presence, almost like the ship's power is linked to your proximity. Linked to me, Hayes echoed, a chill running down her spine. But why? And what does it mean? I don't know, Captain, but whatever this is, it doesn't feel right, Calloway said, his face drawn with concern. Before Hayes could respond, the ship's AI flickered to life on the main console. A soft, almost melodic hum filled the air as the screen came alive. The words that appeared were simple but chilling. Human detected. Activation in progress. Hayes felt a strange pull toward the pilot's chair. It was as if the ship itself were calling to her, urging her to sit. Hesitantly, she moved toward it. The ship seemed to hum louder, the walls around her vibrating with energy. The moment she settled into the chair, the entire room seemed to come alive. It was a sensation like no other. The seat adjusted itself to her form, and the controls at her fingertips responded, as if the ship knew her movements before she made them. Her mind raced with questions. Why her? Why now? Captain. Lieutenant Lee's voice cracked through the silence. What's happening? The ship, it's reacting to you. Hayes hesitated. I'm not sure. It's like the ship is alive. She placed her hands on the controls, feeling the subtle hum of power coursing through her fingers. There was a strange bond forming between her and the ship, one that was more than just mechanical. It felt personal, intimate even. Suddenly, the AI spoke again, but this time, it was more than just a simple activation message. Humanity's pilot, welcome. You are the chosen one. The words echoed in Hayes' mind, the voice calm and almost comforting, yet ominous. She shot a look at the crew, who were standing in stunned silence. The feeling that something ancient and powerful was at play was overwhelming. The crew was silent, watching in awe and growing unease as the ship seemed to recognize her presence. I don't know what this means, Hayes murmured, trying to gather her thoughts. But it's clear that this ship, whatever it is, responds only to me. The AI responded again, but this time, it displayed an ancient symbol on the main screen, a symbol that Hayes didn't recognize, but something deep in her gut told her that it was important. The symbol seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, as though it were trying to communicate something more profound than just the activation of a machine. Captain Hayes leaned forward, studying the symbol. What do you want from me? The ship's response was swift, its voice low and almost haunting. Your species is the key. You are the pilot. Together, we will finish what was started. At that moment, a wave of energy surged through the ship, and the lights flickered. The ship's interior seemed to shift, as if the walls themselves were reconfiguring. The consoles around Hayes hummed to life, showing flashing images, maps of distant galaxies, star systems the crew had never heard of, and most unsettling of all war zones. The ships on the screen looked ancient, and some of them resembled the starship they were aboard. Suddenly, the sense of urgency grew. The AI seemed to recognize that they were in danger. Time is running out. The enemy approaches. Prepare. The word sent a chill through the room. Hayes turned toward the crew, her face pale but determined. The ship, it's saying we're in danger, that an enemy is coming. What enemy? Lee asked, her voice shaking. The screen suddenly showed images of massive enemy fleets, ships the crew had never seen before. The designs were sleek, dark, and ominous, with strange markings similar to the ones on the ship's exterior. The ships didn't look human, and their weapons appeared far beyond anything Earth had ever developed. Captain, Calloway said, his voice tense, I think the ship's not just a vessel. It's a weapon, and we've just activated it. Hayes stared at the images on the screen, realizing the gravity of the situation. The ship had activated for a reason. And it was no coincidence. The ancient ship wasn't just some abandoned relic. It was a weapon created for a purpose, and that purpose had something to do with the war it had once fought. Then we're going to need to learn how to use it, Hayes said, her voice cold with resolve. We don't know who or what's coming, but we have to be ready. The ship's AI spoke again, its voice now more urgent. Prepare the vessel. Humanity is the last hope. The enemy is near. With those words, the entire ship hummed with energy. the powerful hum now vibrating through the walls and underfoot. The crew had no choice now. They were entangled in something much larger than themselves. Whatever the ancient ship had been created for, the crew would need to learn its secrets fast, because humanity's survival might depend on it. A hidden message from the past. The atmosphere aboard the Valiant was tense, more so than it had ever been. The discovery of the ancient ship had already shaken the crew, but now, as Captain Hayes sat in a pilot's chair, the stakes seemed much higher. The ship was alive, and it had a mission, and it seemed to have chosen her to carry out that mission. The crew had gathered in the ship's briefing room. The walls were lined with monitors displaying various alien symbols and cryptic messages from the ship's eye. They were trying to make sense of it all, but nothing was clear. The ship was old, thousands, perhaps millions of years old, but it felt like it had been waiting for something. And now that humanity had discovered it, things were accelerating quickly. "We need answers," Captain Hayes said, her voice firm as she addressed her officers. "We're getting scattered data, but it's not enough. What's the ship trying to tell us? Why does it want me to pilot it? And what exactly is this enemy it keeps referring to?" Lieutenant Lee spoke up, her eyes narrowed in concentration as she scanned through the alien symbols. "I found something strange. These symbols on the ship, they're not just random. They match an ancient human language, a lost language, one that we thought was just a myth." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Lost human language. That was impossible. How could something designed by humans thousands of years ago be lost to time? It didn't make sense. But the more Hayes thought about it, the more it started to feel possible. Maybe humanity hadn't always been as small and young as they thought. Maybe in the distant past, humans had once been part of something far greater than anything they had ever imagined. "We need to find a way to decode this language," Hayes said, her voice growing sharper. "If this ship was made by humans, then it must hold the key to understanding what's going on. How did we end up here? And what's the connection to the war? We'll need time to process it all," Marcus Calloway, the chief engineer, said, his hands busy with the ship's control panels. "But there's something even stranger happening. The ship's internal systems, they're beginning to respond to human presence, but specifically to you, Captain. It's almost like the ship is sensing with your biology. It knows you." Hayes froze. The idea that the ship had somehow recognized her wasn't just disturbing, it was deeply unsettling. She had been the one to sit in the chair, but why her? Why had the ship activated only when she was close? "Sensing with my biology," Hayes echoed, her voice steady but filled with growing unease. "Explain that." Calloway's eyes shifted uneasily. "I'm not sure yet, but it's as if the ship is tuning into you, your thoughts, your instincts, even your emotions. It's becoming personal, like it's responding to more than just your commands." Suddenly, the ship's AI interrupted their conversation, its voice calm and serene but with an underlying urgency. "Human pilot, your species was once great, but your path has led you to near extinction. The ship carries the legacy of your people. The time has come for you to lead again." The words hung in the air, and a chill ran through Captain Hayes. Once great. The AI was referring to humanity, not as it was now, but as something much older, far more advanced. Had humans truly been part of something larger than Earth? And if so, why had they fallen into obscurity? "We need more data," Captain Hayes said, her mind racing. "We need to understand what this ship means by the legacy of humanity and why it's suddenly waking up now." As she finished her sentence, a series of ancient, flickering images appeared on the central screen. The crew gathered around, eyes wide with anticipation. These were not the usual star maps or galactic charts. The images were of humans, but not as they were now. The faces, the ships, the cities, they were far more advanced than anything the crew had ever seen. The AI spoke again, this time more softly. "Before the Zeroin, before the fall, we were the protectors, the leaders of the galaxy. You have forgotten, but the legacy remains. Your people were not always so weak, so divided. Captain Hayes leaned forward, gripping the console. The Jarun. That's the enemy, isn't it? The one the ship keeps referring to. Yes, the Jarun were a galactic plague. They destroyed civilizations, wiped out whole species. They were driven by hatred, a desire for domination. And now they are coming for you again. Hayes felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The Jarun. She had heard the name mentioned once before, by the ship's eye. But now, hearing it again, she realized the true scale of what they were dealing with. The Jarun weren't just any alien species. They were destroyers, galaxy-spanning tyrants who wiped out entire civilizations. And now, according to the ship, they were returning. The screen flickered again, showing more images. This time, it was a battle. A battle between two factions. One side was human, their ships sleek and powerful, their weapons unimaginable. The other side, Jarun, their ships dark and ominous, their weapons devastating. The battle was intense, a war for survival on a galactic scale. We were the ones who fought them. Lieutenant Lee asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The AI responded, its tone somber. You were the last line of defense, humanity. But you failed. The war was lost. The Jarun destroyed your people, your fleets, and your worlds. But the ship, this vessel, was built to survive. It was the last hope. And now it has found you, the human pilot. You are the one who can awaken the power of the past. The room fell into stunned silence. The ship was saying that Captain Hayes was connected to an ancient war, one that had been lost to history. The ship wasn't just a starship. It was a weapon, and it had been designed for one purpose, to defeat the Jarun. But Hayes had no answers. She could barely even comprehend the magnitude of what the AI was telling them. How was she supposed to lead humanity against an enemy as dangerous as the Jarun? What legacy had the ship referred to, and how was she supposed to unlock its power? Suddenly, the ship's AI displayed a final message. It was a symbol, one that was both familiar and foreign. It was a mark of something, someone, important, a key, a way forward. The pilot must be prepared. You will face the enemy soon. The ship's systems are awakening, but you must unlock its secrets. The path to victory lies with you, Captain Hayes. You must remember who you were. The ship fell silent, the glowing symbols fading from the screen, leaving only darkness. Captain Hayes stared at the screen, the weight of the words sinking in. The legacy of humanity had been buried, hidden away by time. Now she was the one tasked with unlocking that power, but the journey ahead was still unclear. The war with the Jarun wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight to reclaim the lost legacy of humanity, to awaken something ancient and dangerous. She turned to her crew, their faces filled with uncertainty and fear, but also a spark of hope. They had been given a chance to not only survive, but to become something greater. But it would come at a cost. Prepare yourselves, Captain Hayes said, her voice calm but resolute. We have a fight ahead of us. The future of humanity and the galaxy now rested on their shoulders. The awakening of the Starship, the tension aboard the Valiant was palpable. In the hours since Captain Hayes had sat in the pilot's chair, the crew had done their best to process everything they had learned. The ship, the AI, and the cryptic messages had only raised more questions. But there was one thing they all agreed on. Something powerful was happening. The ship wasn't just ancient. It was alive, or at least it felt that way. The way it responded to Hayes, the way it seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were waiting for something. The legacy the ship spoke of, the Jarun, and the war that had been lost. It was all connected, a mystery that was too large for any of them to fully understand, yet one that would define their survival. We need to move forward, Captain Hayes said, standing in front of the crew, her voice strong and determined. The ship is activated, and now it's time for us to learn how to use it. We don't have much time before the Zeroan arrive. And from what we've seen, they're coming for more than just us. They're coming for humanity." Her word hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what they had learned. The Zeroan weren't just some galactic faction. They were an existential threat, a force that had once decimated humanity's greatest civilizations. And now, after thousands of years, they were back. "Marcus, have you found any way to interface with the ship's core systems?" Hayes asked, turning toward the ship's chief engineer, Marcus Calloway, who had been tirelessly working at the ship's control panels. "I've been running diagnostics, but it's not simple, Captain," Calloway replied, his voice strained. "The ship's systems are far beyond anything we've encountered. The power source is alien, and it's not like anything we've ever seen. I'm starting to think the ship was not just built for space travel, but for something much more, like it was made for war." "That's what the AI hinted at," Hayes said, looking at the flickering holographic display in front of them. It showed a cross-section of the Starship's interior, and there was no mistaking it now. The ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a weapon. "We need to access whatever defensive capabilities this ship has. If the Zeroan are as powerful as the AI says, we're going to need every advantage we can get." The ship's eye, which had been oddly silent since its last message, suddenly spoke again, its voice reverberating through the command deck. "Human pilot, the ship's systems are awakening, but you must understand, you are not merely a pilot. You are the key." The words sent a chill through the room. Hayes could feel her heartbeat quicken. The key. She already knew the ship was connected to her in a way she couldn't fully explain, but to hear the AI describe her as the key, it was unnerving. "What does that mean?" Hayes asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. "What do you mean I'm the key?" The AI responded in a tone that seemed almost patient, as though it had explained this countless times before. "You are the chosen one, human pilot. You were chosen because your species once held great power. The legacy of humanity is embedded within you. Only one of your kind can activate the full potential of the ship's systems. Only you can wield its weapons, for they are tied to the essence of your people." A deep silence followed the AI's words. The crew was visibly shaken, but Hayes remained calm. Her mind raced. Chosen? She had been a simple officer, not a warrior or a leader. Yet now she was being thrust into the position of someone who would have to wield the power of a lost civilization to defend humanity's future. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "So, how do I unlock this power? What do I need to do?" The AI's response was instantaneous. "You must synchronize with the ship's core. Only then will the full potential of the ship's systems be available to you. But be warned, it will not be easy. The synchronization process is intense. It requires complete harmony between you and the ship. Fail, and the ship will shut down, and humanity's last hope will be lost." Hayes swallowed hard. She had no choice. She had to try. "Prepare for synchronization," Hayes ordered, her voice steady, though her mind was in turmoil. "I'm ready." The crew watched as she moved toward the center of the ship's command deck, where a large, glowing panel had appeared beneath her feet. It resembled a circle, with symbols around its perimeter, symbols that matched the ones on the ship's exterior, symbols that, until now, had been unreadable. The panel was vibrating now, its glow intensifying, and Hayes felt an inexplicable pull toward it. Something deep within her urged her to step closer. "I'm going in," Hayes said, as she knelt down, placing her hands on the panel. The moment her fingers touched it, a jolt of energy shot through her, making her body go rigid. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like being connected to the very heart of the ship. The lights in the room flickered and hummed in response, and the symbols on the walls of the ship began to pulse with an unnatural energy. Hayes could hear the AI's voice, but it wasn't through her ears. It was inside her mind, like a whisper coming from the ship itself. Synchronizing, establishing bond, connecting the pilot to the ship's core. The energy increased, and Hayes' mind seemed to expand, as though the ship was feeding her information, ancient knowledge, memories of battles long past, of galactic wars that she had no knowledge of. She could feel the presence of millions of humans who had fought in this war, and their memories were now merging with hers. She saw ancient ships, human ships, crushing the Zaruan fleet in epic battles. She felt the strength of those who had gone before her, their resolve, their desire to protect humanity's future. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the energy surged through her one final time. The symbols on the walls lit up, the ship's hum grew louder, and then everything went silent. Hayes opened her eyes and took a deep breath. She was no longer the same person. The ship's power had been fully unlocked, and she could feel it in every fiber of her being. She felt connected to the ship, to the lost legacy of humanity, to the warrior spirit that had once protected the galaxy. The AI spoke again, but this time there was a sense of finality in its voice. The synchronization is complete. You are now the vessel. You are now the leader of humanity's legacy. Hayes stood up, her hands still resting on the panel. The weight of her new responsibility settled over her, but there was also a sense of power, of purpose. She now held the key to defeating the Zaruan, to protecting what was left of humanity, and to reclaiming their lost empire. "Let's prepare for battle," Hayes said, her voice calm and decisive. "The Zaruan won't know what hit them." The first strike. The Valiant hummed with newfound power as the crew moved with purpose across the ship's command deck. Captain Hayes stood at the front, feeling the weight of her new responsibility settle on her shoulders. The synchronization with the ancient ship had changed her, not just physically but mentally. She could now sense the ship's core systems, as if they were part of her own body, its vast energy and weapons at her disposal. The legacy of humanity was no longer just a story. It was alive, and it was hers to wield. "Captain," Marcus Calloway said, his voice tinged with awe as he worked at the control panel. "We're reading something on long-range scanners. It's a fleet, an entire Zaruan task force. They're not far, maybe 2 days out." The news sent a chill through the crew. The Zaruan had been silent for so long, but now they were making their move. Hayes knew they couldn't wait any longer. The time for action was now. "How many ships are in the fleet?" Hayes asked, trying to remain calm. Calloway tapped at the console, his brow furrowed. "At least 50 ships, Captain. Some of them are massive, warship-class vessels. It looks like they've gathered for something big." Captain Hayes took a deep breath. She had faced battles before, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for humanity's future. "They'll be on us before we're ready," Hayes said, turning to her officers. "We need to hit them first, disrupt their fleet before they can reach Earth. We'll hit them hard and fast." Lieutenant Lee, standing at her side, nodded. "We've unlocked most of the ship's systems, Captain, but we still need time to master the controls. The weapons systems, some of them are still beyond our understanding. If we push too hard too quickly, we could lose control." "We don't have time for caution, Lieutenant," Hayes replied. "I'm not about to let them reach Earth. We got one shot at this, and we need to make it count." Lee hesitated but finally nodded. "Understood." Hayes turned to the rest of the crew, the reality of the situation sinking in. They were about to launch the first offensive against the Zaruan in millennia. They had no idea what the enemy's full capabilities were, but they couldn't afford to wait any longer. "All hands," Hayes called, her voice resolute. "Prepare for battle. We strike before they strike us." The bridge crew went into motion, running through final checks and adjustments. Hayes could feel the pulse of the ship's systems as she stood before the control panel, her fingers hovering over the activation controls. The Starship, their weapon, responded to her every thought. She felt its energy coursing through her, a symbiotic connection that made her feel both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. "We're approaching their fleet," Calloway reported, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "The enemy ships are starting to move into formation. They're expecting us." The AI's voice, now calm and clinical, echoed in Hayes' mind. The enemy is preparing to strike. The ship's offensive capabilities are ready. Weapons systems are fully online. You are the vessel, Captain. You have the power to lead. The words were both empowering and terrifying. Hayes glanced at her crew. They were all depending on her. There was no turning back now. Initiate attack, Hayes said, her voice cold with resolve. The ship lurched slightly as the Valiant moved into position, its massive engines firing with a roar. The Zeroan fleet was still several clicks away, but they were closing in fast. Hayes activated the ship's advanced sensor array, scanning the enemy formation. She could see the ships now, their dark silhouettes against the backdrop of distant stars. Some of them were even larger than their own vessel, with towering structures and menacing weapon arrays. Target their lead ship, Hayes ordered. Prepare all weapons. I want a direct hit, now. The crew worked quickly, their hands flying over their respective consoles. The ship's weapon systems were still in their infancy, but Hayes could feel them respond to her commands. A soft hum filled the air as the ship's primary cannons powered up, their energy building to a near-critical level. Weapons online, Calloway reported. Ready to fire on your command. Hayes hesitated for a moment. She didn't have the luxury of second-guessing herself. There was no perfect plan here, only the hope that they could hit hard enough to disorient the Zeroan, to give humanity a fighting chance. Fire, Hayes commanded. In an instant, the entire ship seemed to shudder as the weapons systems unleashed a devastating blast of energy. The massive energy pulse shot forward, illuminating the darkness of space as it barreled toward the lead Zeroan warship. Hayes held her breath, watching the screen, hoping, praying, that their attack would land. The shot hit its mark. The Zeroan ship exploded in a blinding flash, a burst of light that sent shockwaves through the surrounding ships. For a moment, everything was still. The Zeroan fleet hesitated, clearly stunned by the unexpected assault. Target their secondary ships, Hayes ordered, her voice firm. Don't let them recover. Calloway quickly reoriented the ship's weapons, launching another volley. This time, the Zeroan fleet reacted more quickly, their ships moving into defensive positions, raising shields and preparing to counterattack. Captain, they're returning fire, Lieutenant Lee called out. Incoming. The Valiant rocked violently as the first blast hit, followed by several more. The shields flickered but held strong, the ancient ship's defensive systems absorbing the blows. Hayes could feel the strain on the ship's structure, but it wasn't enough to slow them down. She had no intention of letting up. Hold them off, Hayes ordered. Give us a clear shot. The Zeroan ships were closing in now, their weapons charging, preparing for a massive retaliation. But Hayes wasn't backing down. The ancient Starship was stronger than anything the enemy could throw at them. It was built for this, and with her at the helm, it had a chance. The ship lurched again, this time from a direct hit on their port side. The bridge shook, and sparks flew from the control panels. But Hayes held firm. We need to take them down before they can regroup, Hayes muttered, eyes locked on the enemy ships on the view screen. Target the largest vessel. Let's end this. The AI's voice came through her mind once more, calm and focused. The vessel is ready. Unleash the power of humanity's legacy. The ship responded as if on instinct. The energy cannon, the most powerful weapon on the vessel, charged up, glowing bright against the dark expanse of space. Hayes gripped the controls, a surge of adrenaline rushing through her veins. She didn't hesitate. Fire. The cannon unleashed a devastating beam of energy, ripping through the heart of the largest Zeroan warship. The ship's shields flickered for a moment before completely failing, and the ship disintegrated under the intense blast. The other Zeroan ships scattered, their fleet in disarray, stunned by the ferocity of the attack. Direct hit. The target is down, Calloway shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. For a moment, everything was still. The remaining Zeroan ships began to retreat, their formations breaking apart as they attempted to flee the oncoming assault. Hayes allowed herself a moment of triumph, but she knew this was just the beginning. The Zharuan were not done. "We've made our mark, but this isn't over," Hayes said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "Prepare for the next wave." The crew nodded, their expressions a mixture of relief and anticipation. They had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. And as the Zharuan fleet retreated into the distance, Hayes knew that they had just awakened the true legacy of humanity. The fight for the future had only just begun. Lee's fingers flew over her console, transmitting the urgent message. "Message sent, Captain. Earth Command has acknowledged. They'll be on standby for reinforcements." Hayes took a deep breath and steadied herself. There was no turning back now. Earth's future was at stake, and it would be a war fought in the stars, in the dark vacuum of space. The Zharuan weren't just attacking Earth. They were aiming to eradicate everything humanity had worked for. But Hayes wasn't going to let that happen. "All crew to battle stations," she said, her voice clear and resolute. "We're going after them, and this time, we'll hit them where it hurts." The crew snapped into action, preparing for the next phase of battle. The Zharuan had made their move, but now it was time for humanity to show them what it was capable of. As the Valiant began to shift its position, moving toward the enemy's newly assembled fleet, Hayes felt the ship pulse beneath her feet. It was as if the ancient vessel was alive, waiting, hungry for the fight. And Hayes was ready. The Zharuan might have underestimated humanity, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. This was their last chance. "We're not just going to defend Earth," Hayes muttered to herself, her hands gripping the controls. "We're going to take the fight to them." The final assault. The countdown had begun. Captain Hayes stood in front of the strategic holotable, her eyes locked on the flickering map of space that displayed the Zharuan fleet's position. The tension was nearly suffocating, but Hayes had learned to keep her emotions in check. This battle would be their last shot, not just at survival, but at preserving humanity's future. The Zharuan, having regrouped, had begun to form a formidable offensive position just outside the orbit of Mars. Their fleet was vast, far more ships than they had anticipated. Hayes knew that if the Zharuan managed to break through their defenses, Earth would be lost. The remaining human colonies on the outer planets would be decimated, and humanity's empire would be nothing but a memory. "Marcus, what's the status on the ship?" Hayes asked, her voice cutting through the tension in the command deck. Calloway was hunched over a console, his hands flying over it in a frenzy. "The Valiant is as ready as it's going to be, Captain. We've patched up what we can, but the ship's systems are strained. The energy weapons are at full capacity, but we're pushing them to their limit. If we don't hit hard, we might lose them." "Then we'll hit hard," Hayes replied. "We can't afford to hold back. We're taking the fight to their heart." She turned to the rest of her officers. The mood on the bridge was grim, but they were all resolute. There was no more time for hesitation. The Zharuan would not stop until humanity was extinguished, and Hayes wouldn't let that happen. "Lieutenant Lee, get us into position. We need to strike before they get a chance to lock onto us." Lee nodded, her fingers moving quickly over the navigation console. "We'll be in range in 5 minutes, Captain. They won't see us coming until we're almost on top of them." Hayes studied the fleet map. The Zharuan had a strong formation around their flagship, a massive warship that was easily 10 times the size of the Valiant. She didn't need to be a strategist to know that the Zharuan would be aiming their heaviest firepower at their own flagship, using their smaller ships as shields and distractions. "We'll use their overconfidence against them," Hayes said, more to herself than to the crew. "Focus all firepower on their flagship. If we can take it down, the rest will fall apart." "I'll prep the energy cannons," Calloway confirmed. "I just received confirmation from Earth Command," Lee said, looking up from her console. "They're standing by with reinforcements, but it'll take them at least an hour to mobilize. We're on our own for now." Hayes let out a breath, then nodded. It was now or never. She had no illusions about the odds. The Zeroan were formidable opponents, and their fleet was unmatched in raw power. But the Valiant wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon, and it was humanity's last hope. The countdown was down to 3 minutes. "We're in position," Captain Lee reported, engaging thrusters to close the distance. "Stand by for the first strike," Hayes said, her voice cold and focused. "Fire at will when we're in range." The ship lurched slightly as they engaged their main engines, pushing the Valiant toward the heart of the Zeroan fleet. The dreadnoughts and warships in the distance grew larger on the screen, their massive frames casting shadows in the blackness of space. The crew went quiet as they prepared for the oncoming battle. Every breath, every heartbeat seemed to echo on the bridge. 2 minutes. The Zeroan fleet hadn't noticed them yet. Their ships were still tightly clustered around their flagship, defensive formations in place. But Hayes knew that the moment they saw the Valiant, all hell would break loose. It was a risk, but it was a calculated one. They had one shot at this. Hayes' fingers hovered over the controls, her grip tightening. She could feel the ship's energy pulsing beneath her feet, like the heartbeat of a giant. It was as though the ship was alive, and with the AI's whispered guidance, she could almost anticipate its movements, its next strike. 1 minute. Lee's voice broke through the tense silence. "We're almost there." Hayes exhaled slowly, her mind sharp. "Focus all firepower on their flagship. Once we've eliminated it, we'd break their formation and take out their command ships." "Understood," Calloway replied. His hands were moving in a blur, coordinating with the targeting systems. "Weapons are locked on. Prepare to fire." The final minute stretched out, every second feeling like an eternity. Hayes could feel the ship's power building, the cannons preparing to unleash their full force. She steeled herself. This was no longer just a fight for their survival. It was a fight for the future of humanity. "Now," Hayes said, her voice sharp. A split second later, the ship shuddered with the force of the energy discharge. The main cannons erupted, sending a beam of pure destructive energy straight toward the Zeroan flagship. The blast tore through space like a comet, its path leaving a trail of brilliant light in its wake. The flagship, once an imposing fortress of dark metal, was obliterated in a massive explosion, the shockwave rattling their ship. The force of the blast was so powerful that it was visible from the farthest reaches of space, lighting up the galaxy in an explosion of light. But the battle was far from over. The remaining Zeroan ships immediately pivoted into attack mode, their guns charging and their smaller crafts coming in fast to shield the crippled remains of their flagship. But the damage had been done. The Zeroan command was in disarray, their fleet fragmented. "We've got them on the run, Captain," Calloway said, his voice rising with excitement. "The flagship's gone, and their ships are scattering." Hayes didn't allow herself to feel relief yet. There was still a fight ahead. An enemy that wouldn't just give up because their leader had fallen. "Keep up the pressure," she ordered. "Target their remaining warships. Don't let them regroup." The ship's weapons hummed again, and another pulse of energy tore through the darkness. The Zeroan's remaining ships attempted to retaliate, firing back with what little power they had left. But the Valiant had already closed the distance, and the ancient ship's weapons were unstoppable. The Zeroan's smaller ships were ripped apart by concentrated fire. Their command vessels fell one by one, unable to withstand the might of the Valiant's advanced weapon systems. "Captain," Lee said, her voice shaking with excitement. "It's over. The Zeroan fleet is retreating. They can't fight us anymore." Hayes stood silently for a moment, staring at the remains of the Zeroan fleet. The ships that had once seemed so invincible were now nothing more than wreckage. The tides of war had shifted, and humanity had won against all odds. The crew began to breathe easier, the tension in the air slowly dissipating. But Hayes knew this victory was only the beginning. There would be more threats ahead, more challenges to face. The Zeroan would never truly give up, and neither would humanity. "Take us home," Hayes said, her voice steady. But beneath it, There was a sense of pride. Humanity had fought back, and for now, they had won.